early life of Jesus today, and let's have a prayer to get started. Father, we thank you that your Spirit is with us today, that you have blessed and touched us, and you're going to guide us as we learn about your Son and his life and how all the things around him helped him to have the life he had. For we pray in Jesus' name, amen. We are looking at the early life of Jesus from the Annunciation to 30 years old. We have now come to, we're going to look at childhood in Jesus' day. How were children raised, treated? What did they do? They did play games a lot like we do, hopscotch. They had jacks and a few things like that. Of course, they were outside a whole lot, running around and playing. They would have animals, stuffed animals, spinning tops, hoops, whistles, things like that they might play with. Didn't have board games or anything like that. Obviously didn't have Nintendos and all that kind of stuff, but they had some toys that they could play with. We find them occasionally in archaeological digs that you find a little horse or cow or something that they would have played with. Fathers had absolute power over their children. They could actually kill them and nobody would say anything to them. They were considered property as girls as long as they lived with their father, boys until they reached bar mitzvah. They were considered to be property, and the father had absolute power over his children. Of course, most of them loved them pretty well, just like ours do today. Girls and boys were looked at differently. Girls were looked at as being a burden on the family. Their birth was not celebrated in any way, usually. We got a girl, okay. It was looked at as a burden because most of the time they knew they were going to be leaving the family. They didn't contribute anything to the income of the family, and so they were looked at as burdens. Stayed with their mother until married. About the age of 13, when they hit puberty, they would be married and start having babies. Some of their tasks would be drawing water, cooking the bread, making it, kneading the dough, grinding the wheat into flour. They would spin wool to make threads to make clothes out of. They would do some gleaning of fields and harvesting on occasions. They would occasionally keep the flocks if there were no young boys to do it. And basically the education was they were learning how to be a good wife, how to take care of their husband, how to take care of kids. Their job was going to be how to take care of the family. Boys, on the other hand, were looked at as very important. This was immortality for your father. You would carry on his bloodline. The Hebrews had the idea that all of the future generations were in the loins of the father, like little seeds. And he would put those seeds in his son, and he would pass those seeds on and on and on. So therefore, they were all an extension of their father. Whether they were named after him, like Junior or not, most of them had just the first name, but they will be the heir. It's very important. Woman had to produce an heir. This is a person that's going to take care of you. This is your social security system. This is your welfare. When your husband dies or when you both get into old age and you can't work anymore, your son is supposed to take care of you. Remember, if you have a rebellious son, what are you supposed to do to him?
Stone him.
Yep, take him down to the front gate of the city, tell the people he's rebellious, and they'll stone him to death. Why? Because you got to have a son that really is going to step up and take the responsibilities. Now, the heir would be circumcised at 7 days old. He would usually be given a name then. He would also be presented at the temple at 40 days old. Usually you didn't present the girls at the temple. The mother would have to go in order to be cleansed at 80 days. because she's twice as unclean for some reason. Nobody's ever explained it to me why, but she was twice as unclean if you have a girl rather than a boy. Once the boy has been weaned anywhere from 3 to 5 years old, depending upon what's going on, he is going to study in the synagogue school 6 days a week. He's going to learn Hebrew and sacred studies. He's going to start learning about this law that he has to live by. Once he hits 10, he starts to study for his bar mitzvah. Bar mitzvah means bar, son, mitzvah, law. He becomes a son of the law. This is where we get the age of innocence. That we say, well, up until a certain age, if a child dies, they just automatically go to heaven. Now that is nowhere in the Bible. It doesn't say that. But he is not responsible for the living by the law until he goes through his bar mitzvah, which makes him then a son of the law. And from then on, he's required. That's usually at age 13. So, he studies for that. He has to learn the law. He has to learn all these there's 615 laws. But he has to learn more than that. He has to learn about what we call the Old Testament. Now the teachers here are the Pharisees. They believe in the entire Bible as being inspired. Remember, the Sadducees only believe in the first 5 books. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy is inspired, and all the rest are just good reading. So they're being taught this law. Now, at age 13, he will have his bar mitzvah. He will mature and become a son of the law. These are bar mitzvahs that are happening at the Western Wall when we've been there before. Notice one thing here. If you'll notice, this man over here has a little box on his head that's got scripture in it, and a box on his arm tied with this ribbon. He has the name of God on his hand. It says Yod on his hand. He puts the scriptures on his mind and on his body, his muscles, and he is there praying over these 2 boys which are going through their bar mitzvah. They have huge celebrations there. The whole family will come. They'll come in with drummers and trumpets blowing, and they'll be underneath a canopy that'll be carried by 4 boys that'll come in. He'll bring in the law. Remember, there's still scrolls there, not books. This is a scroll of the law, because he is now a son of the law. And you notice he comes in, and they make a really big deal out of it. After 13, he has matured. If it is deemed that he is a really good scholar, he may go to advanced school at age 15, learning how to be a rabbi. He will select his own rabbi to follow. Jesus was different. He selected his students. Now remember, all of the students that Jesus selected had failed at this. Nobody, they had not been picked to be going on to learn advanced lessons. They were fishermen. They were tax collectors. They were doing all these things. These are not the people, when Jesus picked them, they were adults. They were not the people that had been picked and said, oh, you're a really good scholar learning about religious matters. You need to go on and learn more about it. So Jesus picked the failures. These are people that hadn't been able to learn. Now, he would work with his father 6 days a week if he didn't go into advanced school. And on the 7th day, he would go to Torah, study the Torah on the Sabbath with the rabbi, as all the others would. So this is what he would be doing now as an adult. As he has now, he's considered an adult at age 13. He would be studying the Torah. Now, if he was a member of the priestly family, which Jesus and John the Baptist both were, they would usually at 30 years old take over working on the religious stage. You come over here, here's a chair right here.
Oh, I'm good.
Now, you come on.
Go on, guys.
Okay. He would take over at 30 years old. So that's why we say from Annunciation to 30 years old. When we end today, Jesus will be around 30 years old. It will be time for him to take up his ministry in some way. Normally he would go down to the temple and be a priest. But John the Baptist decided to be a prophet instead and serve God that way. Now, let's look at Sepphoris, which is the jewel of the Galilee nearby him. Jesus, after he has gone through his bar mitzvah, will probably be working as a tekton. That's the Hebrew word which means builder. It does not necessarily mean carpenter. It could mean stone. It could mean whatever materials. Most of the building in this area was going on in stone. And as I pointed out a little bit ago, right over here on this hill, this is the edge of Nazareth, right over here on this hill, all this area here and way on out in the area was being built as a new capital for Galilee. It's not far from Nazareth. It's within a mile walk. If Jesus is a tekton, I kind of have pictured that Nazareth was one of these trailer communities that sometimes set up around construction sites where all the construction site workers work for a while, and then when that's over, they pile into their trailers and they go to the next construction site. But it's a Roman town, basically. These are some of the mosaic floors, and I remember mosaics are these little stones. Somebody picked out little stones and made all these pictures with them. It's amazing when you think about the colors they'd have to pick and realize that this little stone right over here I had to have that color, and over here I have to have this color. This is called the Mona Lisa of the Galilee because she's supposedly so pretty and enigmatic. These were floors on a dining room. Now obviously this is Roman. How could I know? Anybody? They got human depictions. You cannot picture, even on a painting, a statue or anything, any kind of human or animal because they could be worshipped. So you wouldn't have, these would be just old abstract patterns or weavings or something like that on a mosaic floor for a Jewish family. At least an observant Jewish family. Now, maybe he was a construction worker in stone, we're not really sure. Or maybe he just worked in wood with his father, as people thought carpenter. I think the reason we have carpenter is because when the King James Version was made, tekton builders in England, they did work of stone on some of the public buildings, but mainly they did wood working. Now, he's 12 years old. He heads to Jerusalem. Every year, Jesus, this is only in the book of Luke, by the way. Every year, Jesus' parents traveled to Jerusalem for the Feast of Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up as they were always did for the feast. When it was over, they left for home. The child Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents didn't know it. Thinking he was somewhere in the company of pilgrims, they journeyed for a whole day and then began looking for him among relatives and neighbors. When they didn't find him, they went back to Jerusalem looking for him. The next day they found him in the temple, seated among the teachers, listening to them and asking questions. The teachers were quite taken with him, impressed with the sharpness of his answers. But his parents were not impressed. They were just upset and hurt, I bet. That's an understatement. His mother said, "Young man, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been half out of our minds looking for you." Jesus said, "Where have you been looking for me? Didn't you know I had to be here dealing with my father's things of my father?" But they had no idea what he was talking about. They should have. Now notice what he's doing. He's gone through his bar mitzvah. He goes to work with his father. The question is, which father is he going to work with? He's working with his Father in heaven. Now what happens is they have headed to Jerusalem. They've been to Passover over and over again. He's been down there 12 times. He knows pretty well about Jerusalem. But this time, because he's 12 years old, he's going to go through his bar mitzvah, become a son of the law. Now, when he travels to Jerusalem, he's traveling as a child. When he comes back, he's traveling as a man. They get very busy in Jerusalem during the Passover Feast. Thousands upon thousands of people are coming. Sacrifices are being made all over the place. It's a very busy time. They have the Passover Feast, and then the next day they get ready to head home. Now, it's not just a jumble of people going home. Men always walk in the front. Then behind them comes a group of women and children, and then men walk in the back. Now, probably what has happened is Jesus walked as a child with his mother in the middle of the group when they went. Coming back, he's supposed to be walking with the men, with his dad. His dad looks around, can't find him, and says, oh, Jesus forgot he's supposed to be walking with us. So I'll go and I'll tell him when we get to the thing he needs to walk with us. He's a man now. His mother thinks, well, he's up there with the men. That's really wonderful. I'm really proud of him. He knew what he was supposed to do. And, of course, they're traveling with a lot of relatives, and he's mixed in a group, and it may be a group of 2,000, 3,000 people. And they just assume he's with them. How would you like to tell God you lost his son? They travel. But Jesus is sitting there talking with the rabbis. Now, what they would normally do with a rabbi, they would ask the rabbi questions. And then the rabbis would answer. And Jesus' questions are really pointed and really interesting because many of them had never thought of them before. They're totally fascinated with this little kid. While he's doing that, his parents have walked from Jerusalem, which is right here, down to Jericho. They're going to come down here, cross the Jordan River, go up this side, cross back over the Jordan River, and go back to Nazareth. They don't walk through here because that's what? Samaria. And they don't go through that area. So they've walked one day's journey down to Jericho, and there they camp for the night and can't find him. Now, they're not going to come back that day. That night. It is no way. You're walking on little paths that may be this wide along a mountainside that drops off 1,000 feet on one side. You just can't do it at night. So they wait till the next morning, they get up and they rush back to Jerusalem. It takes them a day to get back. They look all day long. They don't find him anywhere. And they finally go to the temple. Now, I'm pretty sure his mother didn't say, oh, we've been missing you. I'm pretty sure she was about to scream at him. Jesus just doesn't understand what's going on. I mean, he's there. He's supposed to be working with his father. But he finds him finally. Now, let's look at Jerusalem in Second Period Temple. The time that we're talking about of Jesus. Let's take a trip around Jerusalem. This is the hills right here. These hills is where Jerusalem is today. This is the city in the time of David and Nehemiah. It's a very small city. By the time of Jesus, it has grown to be this big. It's added a huge temple complex here and various other areas around it. This area, this is a model of it. If you were 6 inches tall, you could live in this model. It's built to scale. It's huge, covers probably several acres. It's at the Israeli Museum. It was originally at a hotel there. They took it apart and put it back, but every time they find an archaeological evidence, they change this model to make it as close as possible to the time of Jesus. You can see some people walking around it back here to get a scale of what this is. The wall here is about waist high. Now we're going to look around this city a little bit. This area here is where the temple was. We've looked at the temple and talked about it a whole lot. We'll talk about it maybe a little bit more at the end of Jesus' life. But here you have what I call the whole thing the temple, but this the temple building. But these are the outer courts. This is the royal story where they had the market. You enter down here. You can go up this ramp or up this ramp. Inside here is where the Lord is and where you worship. This is one of those retaining walls about this high right here. Ground level inside is about right here right now. And then this wall is around it. The city of David area. This is the area, that's all of the city of David that there would have been at the time of David. It's a low hill area. The pool of Siloam is right, Gihon Spring, rather, their only water source is located right about here. This is the Kedron Valley that you would walk through here. This is a place of palaces and synagogues. There's a palace here to the Queen of Abilene. She converted to Christianity and she had a palace there. One of these synagogues in particular, this one right here, was the synagogue of the freedmen. These are men who had been slaves who were freed as Jews, and they came here. Paul was one of their attendees here. This is the one group that eventually stoned Stephen. We know the synagogue of the freedmen because we found the inscription of the synagogue of the freedmen on the ruins of this area. Stephen was taken from here. Next we have what's called the lower city. This is where the poor people live. Houses would have looked something like this. They all had 2 stories. The reason is the first story they lived on, but the second story, they had so many feasts and festivals in Jerusalem that everybody had to come to, they could rent out that room and make money. So they all built second stories to them, and you'd rent the room for the day to have your feast in. But this is not a lot of airflow here. It's really crowded, small streets. You can see the area here. Another picture of it here of this model, but it would be pretty accurate as to what it might have looked like. Had a hippodrome here. That's horse racing. That was in this area. Next on up, you come to the upper city. This is where the richer people lived in the time of Jesus. This is where this is the tomb of David, this structure here that would have been in that area. Here, in this area down here is the Hasmonean Palace. This is where, if you read Maccabees, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, the apocryphal books, these are the kings who built this palace to live in. Of course, here's the Temple Mount here. Had a theater here. We found some of the tickets. It tells you what seat to sit in. Now, remember, all the theaters, all the plays are on the mythology of the Greeks and Romans. So these are gods enacting in gods. Not a very good Jewish theme. Moving on, right in this area, that yellow area I just put up, was Herod the Great built a palace. He built a wall all the way around it because he was afraid his subjects would kill him. So he has a wall inside the wall of the city around his place. This was magnificent. He had flowing water springs. He had flushing toilets, bathtubs with drains and everything in it. So it would have been in this area right here of the old city today. This is what's called this area of his thing was called the Citadel. It was another fortress inside his palace that he could flee to. This one right here, this tower had water. They would hand carry water up to there so it could flow down and gravity and therefore run all those things in his palace, fountains and everything. This part still exists today. The Romans, when they came in to destroy the city, said this will show how strong this city was. They put their forces here. The 10th Legion had its headquarters here. And today, this is the area you can still see today. You see the bases of those towers. And this area today is from that time of Herod the Great. His palace would have stuck all the way back out in this area here. And this is where the Damascus gate is. So there's also another place here called Caiaphas' house. This is where the rich people lived, and Caiaphas was, remember, the high priest of the time. This is the house that Jesus is going to be brought to eventually for being tried. It had mosaic floors. Notice you don't see any people. This is a Jewish floor. It's just patterns. These are stone water pots. They're stone because stone can't become impure. If they'd had pottery water pots, they could. You have to carve these out of stone, and so they don't become impure, so he can have water there. He has a bathtub. These are mikvah baths. What those are is ritual purification baths. You walk down, you dip in, you come out. It's not like taking a bath to get clean. It's to be cleansed and made pure. Their bathtub had flowing water drains. There was flushing toilets in this house. These are not dumb people. You think that people live so primitively, but they had some of the conveniences we did. Moving on, this area was where the markets were, mainly, and other public buildings. The Agora, or market, was there. They would have these round markets, and you just come and set up there like a farmer's market or whatever, and you sell your goods. Today, if you walk into Jerusalem, they're all sitting on the streets everywhere, and you just, you can buy things off of people, or they have stores, and etc. The last part, let me talk about the Pool of Bethesda is located over here. This is where he's going to heal the man that can't get into the water, if you remember that story. What would happen is you had two pools here. This pool would drain into this one, and when the water drained, it bubbled this water down here, and they said when the water bubbles, the Spirit of God is, the Spirit is there, it's not God. It was a pagan healing site, but had a Jewish man there. Now, right over here is where the temple is. So right outside the temple, they had a pagan healing site. Now then you have the northern suburbs up here in this area. This is where the wealthiest of the wealthiest lived. Now this wall was not here in Jesus' day. This was outside the city walls. And right here is where he was crucified. You got a wasp. But right here is where he's going to be crucified. This area was open. They built this wall about 5 years after Jesus died. And became part of the city. Now Jesus, it says, so he went back to Nazareth with them and lived obediently with them. His mother held these things deep within herself, and Jesus matured, growing up in both body and spirit, blessed by both God and people. And that 2 verses in Luke covers 30 years. Well, no, 17 years. From 13 years old until he's 30 years old. Notice he goes home with them. He doesn't stay in the temple. He decides to go home and be obedient to his parents and live and grow. Now, this matches most biographies that we have from that time period. Usually a biography tells something about his birth. We know a couple of stories about his birth. It would tell a story about something that happened during his childhood, and then it would take up when that person became a public figure or started doing their work or whatever, like of a poet, and when he first started writing his poetry and all. And that's what happens here. We have a couple of stories of Jesus' life. We have a story as he's growing up, and then it jumps all the way over till he starts ministering. And so Jesus goes home and he learns how to be a tekton. Now, we don't know how long Joseph lived. We do know that by the time he reaches 30 years old and starts his ministry, Joseph disappears from the record. They don't mention him anymore. It's Mary's son. Tradition is he died at a very early age. Now, again, we don't know. Jesus has people called brothers and sisters in the Bible. If you're a good Catholic, you believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary, so therefore, it's not Jesus' full siblings, it's his half-siblings. And his father had been married before, had children, and these are his half-brothers and sisters. The word would be the same whether it's half-brothers or whole. If you're Protestant like us and other people, then you believe after Jesus, Mary had other children. There's no reason to believe that. The reason that's important is because if she had other children, then Jesus is the oldest, and he would have been taking care of the family for 30 years. Or after his dad died, he would be the breadwinner. He would be taking care of them and providing for all of them. If, on the other hand, he has older siblings, they might be provided. Now, there's actually some good evidence that they may be half-brothers and sisters. If you remember on the cross, Jesus turns to John the Apostle and says, "This is your mother, take care of her." She would have been taken care of by her other children, if there were other children, not by an outsider like John. So the fact that she's given her to John may mean that she doesn't have any other children of her own. Now we do know James, the brother of Jesus, becomes actually the leader of the church later on down the line. But he may be a half-brother. Again, the word brother is general for, he might be his father had other children, wife died, married Mary. She took care of those children and had Jesus. And then that was all their children. Or it may be that Jesus was the first of many children, brothers and sisters. We don't know for sure. Now, that pretty well ends us with the early life of Jesus. He will be starting into his ministry. We would actually be starting next week with the, at 30 years old. But I don't want to do that. And the reason why is Easter's coming up. What I want to do is jump 3 years ahead, 3.5 years ahead. And I want to start on Palm Sunday and deal with the last week of Jesus' life and then on up into his ascension into heaven. That's what I'd like to. I can do it in about 4 or 5 sessions, and we can finish it up just before Easter, if that's okay with y'all. And then we'll leave that center section out right now, and then we'll decide if we want to go back to it, if y'all want to do something else, or y'all want to quit, or you're getting tired of me, or what. Whatever.
I may have missed it, but how old was it when he was crucified? 30?
33 and a half, most people would say. The reason for that is 30 years he started his ministry. If you looked at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he only ministered 1 year. He had 1 Passover. But John mentions 3 Passovers. So probably 3 Passovers, and then and most people say it's about 3.5 years of his actual ministry once he's baptized by John the Baptist. Is what most people think these days. Any other questions?
You may have gone through all this and I've missed once or twice. When did Jesus realize that he was God's son?
I have no idea. He obviously seemed to realize it at 13 years old because he was in the temple. He was about his father's business. I'm assuming Mary and Joseph told him that he was, about the stories of his birth. But I don't know for sure. I mean, I can't tell you. It doesn't really say in the Bible. But obviously by 13 he knows, because he says, I must be about my father's. Didn't you know I was going to be here about my father's business?
And you wonder why Jesus lived such a short life. If he could have lived on and on.
Well, I know he lived a short life. He got on the bad side of everybody he possibly could have, and they crucified him. He needed to be crucified in order to pay for your and my sins. We will talk about it, but in that last week, he's in Jerusalem. He alienates just about everybody he can with one or more of his teachings. He alienates the Romans, he alienates the Sadducees, he alienates the Pharisees, he alienates the Zealots, he alienates the normal people. His teachings get them all mad at him. He was pushing pretty hard to get crucified. He needed to be crucified on Passover Day. He actually dies at the time they're up in the temple sacrificing the Passover lambs. It's specific. He is on the cross from 6 to 9. And that's when they started, 6 is when they started sacrificing those lambs. Anybody else?
Where does Herod come from?
Herod the Great?
Wasn't he Jewish?
No, Herod was an Idumean. His father was Antipater. Antipater was a military leader for the Idumeans. They were conquered by the Jews, given the choice of convert or die. And they converted, and Antipater rose up through the ranks and eventually became leader of the military of the Hebrews also. When the king died, Herod the Great ran to Rome, and he had friends there, and he asked them, the Senate made him king. He was not born king, he was made king by the Roman Senate. He then comes back with an army and conquers the area. The Parthians had moved in and taken over behind him. And so he conquers the area. So you have Herod the Great, but now when I say which Herod, realize that Herod liked that name so much he named 5 of his sons Herod, and they named 3 of their sons Herod. So you have Herod the Great, Herod Antipas, Herod Philip, Herod Archelaus, and then there's several other Herods that you run into in the New Testament in the book of Acts during the time of Paul. Those are not all the same person. They're different people, several generations, but the name Herod is throughout there, so you have to be careful when you use the name Herod. So I always use the identifier, Herod the Great, Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas is the one that is ruling in the Galilee at this time. Herod the Great died, and so Herod Antipas is now ruling in the Galilee.
She's the one that had worms, that died because of worms. One of the people who worship him.
Yes. He, well, they say worms. Basically, he came out, and this happened at Caesarea Maritimia, which is actually the theater he was in, actually still exists today. He comes out in a golden uniform at sunup, and it glows. He's trying to impress the people from Tyre. He's had a bad relationship with them. They've come down to try and make peace. And they say, oh, he's a god, he's a god. And he says, yeah. And God struck him, and he says his bowels burst open.
Was that Antipas?
That was Antipas, yes. And his bowels burst open, and he died. Because of that, because he took on the name of God. But that, actually, the theater stage he was on still exists today. You can go stand on that stage.
You feel funny standing up there?
No, I don't. I mean, there's a lot going on since then. They actually have concerts there now, concerts of all different kinds. The acoustics in that is great. I mean, it's a huge stadium, a huge theater, amphitheater. The amphitheater's half, and you can stand down on the bottom and talk just about like this, and a person 1,000 feet away up at the top can hear every word you're saying because of the way it's been designed. And you look out, and behind it is the Mediterranean Sea and the coastline.